In this video, we'll uncover the shocking evidence that challenges everything we've been taught about ancient Egypt and reveal why this mystery could rewrite human history. Stick around, because what you're about to learn will change how you see the past forever. Let's start with the Great Sphinx. Most Egyptologists claim it was built around 2500 BCE, but there's a problem. The erosion patterns on its body don't match the dry climate of Egypt. Geologist Robert Schoch, after years of study, concluded that the Sphinx shows signs of water erosion, suggesting it was exposed to heavy rainfall.
I am convinced that it is a ruin from pre-dynastic Egypt.
And here's the kicker. The last time Egypt experienced such rainfall was over 12,000 years ago, during the Younger Dryas period, a time when the Sahara was lush and green.
I must pay tribute to two individuals, actually three individuals in particular. One of them is John Anthony West. He was the first person in our era to begin to wonder if the Sphinx was much older than it had been. Actually, he got that idea from a philosopher called Schwaller de Lubicz, who'd noticed what he thought was water erosion on the body of the Sphinx. John West picked that up, and he was a great amateur Egyptologist himself. And when he looked at the Sphinx and at the strange scalloped erosion patterns and the vertical fissures, particularly in the trench around the Sphinx, he began to think maybe Schwaller was right. Maybe there was some sort of flooding here. And that's when he brought Robert Schoch, geologist at Boston University. He brought Schoch to Giza and say, well, it looks to me like the Sphinx was exposed to at least 1,000 years of heavy rainfall.
We have incredible amount of weathering and erosion on the Sphinx. I now think that it goes back to the end of the last ice age, circa 10,000 BC.
And as Schoch's calculations have continued, as he's continued to be immersed in this mystery, he's continuously pushed that back. And he's now, again, looking at the date of around 12,500 years ago, during the Younger Dryas, for the creation of the Great Sphinx. And then, of course, this is the period of the wet Sahara, the humid Sahara. The Sahara was a completely different place during the Ice Age. There were rivers in it, there were lakes in it, it was fertile, it was possibly densely populated, and there was a lot of rain. There's not no rain in Giza today, but there's relatively little rain.
Now, let's talk about the pyramids. The three Great Pyramids of Giza are perfectly aligned with the stars of Orion's belt, a constellation the ancient Egyptians associated with Osiris, their god of the afterlife. But here's the twist. The alignment isn't perfect for 2500 BCE. Rewind the stars using astronomical precession, and you'll find they match perfectly around 10,500 BCE, the same time the Sphinx likely existed. Coincidence? Or evidence of a much older civilization?
The next person who needs to be mentioned in this context is Robert Bauval. Robert is the genius, and it does take a genius sometime to make these connections, because nobody'd noticed it before, that the three pyramids of Giza are laid out on the ground in the pattern of the three stars of Orion's belt. And skeptics will say, well, you can find any buildings and line them up with any stars you want, but Orion actually isn't any old constellation. Orion was the god Osiris in the sky. He was, the ancient Egyptians called the Orion constellation Sahu, and they recognize it as the celestial image of the god Osiris. So what's being copied on the ground is the belt of a deity, of a celestial deity. It's not just a random constellation. And then when we take precession into account, you find something else very intriguing happening. First of all, you find that the exact orientation of the pyramids as it is today, and pretty much as it was when they're supposed to have been built 4,500 years ago, it's not precisely related to how Orion's belt looked at that time. There's a bit of a twist. They're not quite right. But as you precess the stars backwards, as you go back and back and back, and you come to around 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago, in the Younger Dryas, you find that suddenly they lock perfectly. They match perfectly with the three pyramids on the ground. And that's the same moment that the Great Sphinx, an equinoctial monument, aligned perfectly to the rising sun on the spring equinox. Anybody can test this for themselves. Just go to Giza on the 21st of March, be there before dawn, stand behind the Sphinx, and you will see the sun rising directly in line with the gaze of the Sphinx.
And then there's the Sphinx's head. Many researchers, including Graham Hancock, believe it was originally a lion, a symbol of the constellation Leo. Around 10,500 BCE, Leo would have risen directly behind the Sphinx during the spring equinox. But by 2500 BCE, the age of Taurus, a lion wouldn't make sense. This suggests the Sphinx was recarved into a pharaoh's head thousands of years later, preserving an ancient astronomical message.
But the question is, what constellation was behind the Sphinx? And 12,500 years ago, it was the constellation of Leo. And actually, the constellation of Leo has a very Sphinx-like look. And I and my colleagues are pretty sure that the Sphinx was originally a lion entirely. Over the thousands of years, it became damaged, it became eroded, particularly the part of it that sticks out the head. By the time you come to the Fourth Dynasty, when the Great Pyramids are supposedly built, by the time you come to the Fourth Dynasty, the head of the lion, original lion head, would have been a complete mess. And we suggest that it was then recarved into a pharaonic head. Egyptologists think it was the pharaoh Khafre, but there's no real strong resemblance. But it's definitely wearing the Nemes headdress of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. And we think that that's a result of a recarving of what was originally not only a lion-bodied, but also a lion-headed monument. It wouldn't make sense if you create an equinoctial marker in the time of Khafre, 4,500 years ago, and the Sphinx is an equinoctial marker. I mean, it's 270 feet long and 70 feet high, and it's looking directly at the rising sun on the equinox. If you create it then, you'd be more likely to create it in the shape of a bull, because that was the age of Taurus, when the constellation of Taurus housed the sun on the spring equinox. So why is it a lion? And again, we think that's because of that observation of the skies and putting on the ground, as above, so below, putting on the ground an image of the sky at a particular time. Now, the fact that the Giza Plateau, that the principal monuments of the Giza Plateau, the three Great Pyramids and the Great Sphinx, all lock astronomically on the date of around 10,500 BC, to me is most unlikely to be an accident. And actually, if you look at computer software at the sky at that time, you'll see that the Milky Way is very prominent and seems to be mirrored on the ground by the River Nile. I suggest that may be one of the reasons amongst many why Giza was chosen as the site for this very special place.
But the evidence doesn't stop there. The megalithic temples near the Sphinx, built with blocks weighing up to 100 tons, show erosion patterns that match the Sphinx. Even more intriguing, the granite blocks added later were cut to fit these erosion marks, proving the temples existed long before the dynastic Egyptians. So, who built them and why?
The point I want to make is an astronomical design on the ground which memorializes a very ancient date does not have to have been done 12,500 years ago. If from the ancient Egyptian point of view, you're there 4,500 years ago, and there's a time 8,000 years before that, which is very, very, very important to you, you could use astronomical language and megalithic architecture to memorialize that date on the Giza Plateau, which is what we think we're looking at, except for one thing, and that's the erosion patterns on the Sphinx. And we're pretty sure that the Sphinx, at least, does date back to 12,500 years ago. The megalithic temples, the so-called Valley Temple, which stands just to the east and just to the south of the Sphinx, and the Sphinx Temple, which stands directly in front of the Sphinx. The Sphinx Temple has largely been destroyed, but the Valley Temple, attributed to Khafre on no good grounds whatsoever, is a huge megalithic construction with blocks of limestone that weigh up to 100 tons each. And yet it has been remodeled, refaced with granite. There are granite blocks that are placed on top of the core limestone blocks. And those core limestone blocks were already eroded when the granite blocks were put there. Why? Because the granite blocks have actually been purposefully and deliberately cut to fit into the erosion marks.
Now, let's dive into the Great Pyramid. This 6 million ton marvel is aligned to true north with astonishing precision, within 1/60th of a degree. Its internal chambers, including the King's Chamber and the mysterious subterranean chamber, suggest it was more than just a tomb. The absence of hieroglyphs inside, unlike later pyramids, hints at a different purpose. And the graffiti attributing the pyramid to Pharaoh Khufu? Some experts believe it might have been forged. So, who really built it?
The Great Pyramid is built around a natural hill, and that natural hill might have been seen as the original primeval mound to the ancient Egyptians. The three Great Pyramids of Giza are different from later pyramids. Is the story of pyramid building? When did it really begin? And the timeline that we get from Egyptology is the first pyramid is the pyramid of the pharaoh Zoser, about 100 years or so before the Giza pyramids are built. And then we have this explosion in the Fourth Dynasty, dynasty of true pyramids. We have 3 of them attributed to a single pharaoh, Sneferu, who built supposedly the pyramid at Maidum and the 2 pyramids at Dashur, the bent and the red pyramid. And then within that same 100-year span, we have the Giza pyramids being built. This is according to the Orthodox chronology. And then suddenly, once the Giza project is finished, pyramid building goes into a massive slump in ancient Egypt. But what happens when you go inside them is you find that they're extensively covered in hieroglyphs and imagery, repeating the name of the king who was supposedly buried in that place. Whereas the Giza pyramids have no internal inscriptions whatsoever. What we do have is one piece of graffiti. There was an Arab caliph, Caliph al-Mamun, who had already realized that other pyramids did have their entrances in the north face. Nobody knew where the entrance to the Great Pyramid was. But he figured there's an entrance to this thing. It's going to be in the north face somewhere. So he put together a team of workers, and they went in with sledgehammers and they started smashing where he thought would be the entrance. And they cut their way into the Great Pyramid for a distance of maybe 100 feet. And then the hammering that they did dislodged something. They heard a little bit further away something big falling, and they realized there was a cavity there, and they started heading in that direction. And then they joined the internal passageway of the Great Pyramid, the descending and the ascending corridors that go up. When you go up the ascending corridor, every one of the internal passageways in the Great Pyramid that people can walk in slopes at an angle of 26 degrees. That's interesting because the angle of slope of the exterior of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees. So we know mathematicians were at work as well as geometers in the creation of the Great Pyramid.